Hey, what's up, YouTube? So today we're going to be talking about the book Effective C, An Introduction to Professional C Programming by Robert Seacord. So first off, what is the book? Well, the subtitle is An Introduction to Professional C Programming, and that's pretty much pretty good subtitle. Um, Generally, it's like a concise overview of using the C programming language without skipping the essentials or overly glossing over mistakes and like kind of details that end up being incorrect, and giving you code that kind of works but is also not quite like 100% safe. And yeah so as part of that, it's very detailed, but it's not like overly verbose. It's not a technical manual kind of thing. um, it's a pleasant read. It has all the detail you need, but not too much. um, and one thing that I really enjoyed about it is that C has been described before by Bjorn Schustrup, the creator of C++, as easy to shoot yourself in the foot. We call these foot guns, and the foot guns are very common in C. But this book will help you keep the safety on and understand the foot guns, know where they're at, and not shoot them. Good question is who is it for? And I would say that this book is most useful for anyone who wants to learn modern C. So like KNR and C programming, a modern approach, are very good, and they're kind of like the usual recommendations for learning C, but they don't really cover more than C11 in the latter case. This book, Effective C, covers C17 and C2X. And if you pick up the second edition, which was published October of 2024, that also covers C23. So you'll get up to up to C23 with these books. I'd say the second most useful, or the group who would find, or the second group who would find it useful, is just anyone who wants to learn systems programming better. So C and C++ are the obvious languages that will benefit from reading this book. C++ a little less so, but it's still helpful. I'm more of a C++ guy myself, but still enjoyed this book. So but also, aspiring learners of like Rust or Zig or Odin, similar languages that are, low level memory management and all that stuff, can also find value in a better understanding of C. Who should not read this book? It's probably not useful for like C or C++ experts, or for developers who are kind of working in a domain abstracted far away from memory and OS calls and stuff like that. So data engineering, data science, advanced infra stuff. Although in that case, like it might be useful, but probably won't be. So this is kind of a that thing. Next, like, what does it cover? And the answer to that is basically everything. C ends up being a pretty simple language ultimately, and this kind of goes over kind of everything. So it starts with getting a basic program running, the classic hello world. And then it goes over some preliminary important stuff, such as like operating systems, compilers available that are depending on the operating system. So like, if you're on Windows, then your options are basically, pretend you have Linux with WSL, which is a fine option. It's not a bad thing. Or use, the Microsoft Visual C compiler. And then if you're on Linux or Mac OS, then you have like LLVM and GCC available, and so you have different options depending on the operating system. Your code editors are also kind of dependent on operating system to an extent, and stuff like that. And then chapters 2 and 3 are about like objects, functions, and types, so kind of the basic building blocks of the language. And then 4 and 5 are more on the syntax, so it goes into some of the expressions, operators, control flow. Operators especially is like a good thing to read, because there's a lot of like weird stuff that happens with like the prefix and postfix increment operators, or increment and decrement operators. They're weird, so you should definitely pay attention to that part. Chapter 6 is on dynamically allocated memory, so that'll talk about the heap and the stack, malloc, dynamic arrays, realloc. It doesn't really talk about like allocation strategies, so like arena allocators and stuff isn't really touched on that much. But it kind of goes over the basics of dynamic allocation. And then chapter 7 is on characters and strings, This took up a whole page of my notes, so I took about 6.5 pages of notes, and characters and strings took up an entire page. So, but it goes over like Unicode. Goes really it goes into really good detail on like Unicode and its history, why it exists, the difference between like UTF-8 versus 16 versus 32. And then it also talks about platform differences. Spoiler alert: Windows is weird and does weird things. It also talks about like wide versus narrow characters and strings, and some other stuff like that. Chapter 8 is input and output, mostly just streams and files. It's not too much beyond that. Chapter 9 is preprocessor directives, mostly discussing macros and weird things that can happen with macros. There's also a pretty good kind of diagram on not diagram, but like talks about kind of how like the how your source code eventually turns into a binary or a library or whatever. And so that's some good stuff. Chapter 10 is on program structure, and so this is like cohesion, coupling, abstractions, and stuff. This is like this kind of stuff has been in general programming advice for a while now. So there a lot of it won't be like super new if you're a fairly experienced software developer. But there is a good discussion on like libraries and dynamic and shared libraries versus static libraries, and kind of how they have different ways of like being part of your application, whether they're part of the binary or like they're part of system libraries or whatever. So good for that. And then the last chapter, chapter 11, is on debugging, testing, and analysis. And this has a really good discussion of static analysis and testing in C, which is something that I didn't really have a good understanding of before this book. So definitely recommend it just for that. So it's been a bunch of stuff about what's in the book. So what are my thoughts on the book? Well, I thought the book was great. And not only because Mr. Seacord and I used to be coworkers. We didn't work very closely, but we did used to work at the same company. Before this book, I hadn't really sat down with a C resource before. I'd sat down with a couple of C++ resources, but never really like a C resource. And so it really helped like kind of align all of my scattered knowledge about C and memory and that stuff on like a central axis, while filling in a lot of the gaps that I had of my understanding. So I definitely enjoyed that aspect of it. And then one thing I thought was really nice is that like it goes over like the C footguns, of course, and it also like shows you the adjustments necessary. And it's nice that they're not really they're not weird or unintuitive or anything. They're kind of just something you have to know, when you're like using things like macros or working cross-platform. So I really, I thought that was really nice that it's just, it's not like ooh, macros. It's just kind of like macros, and you should know this, So that was nice. So generally, A+++, super recommend, especially if, like mentioned earlier, you're in the group of like you want to learn C from a more modern resource, or if you want to learn systems programming better. Otherwise, still think it's great, but maybe less useful than if you're in one of those groups. And so down below I'll have an affiliate link if you want to pick it up and help support the channel. And then I also have a link to CPPcast episode 339 with Robert Seacord. Really good episode. He's a funny guy. Has some good stories in there too. So yeah, that's it. Have a good one.